Oh, hello. Welcome to your webinar today. Looks like everybody's filtering in. We are getting started. Good morning, good afternoon. First of all, let me introduce who we have here. We have a team from both DVMelite and from Vetstoria. This is our first time being in partnership, bringing you this topic. So I'm Christy from DVMelite. I'm the program manager there, and introducing Emily Newcomer, who heads up our Dream Team Elite program. And we have Summer from Vetstoria. And we have found that we have a lot in common, particularly working with veterinary practices, and know that there is a big need to discuss the elephant in the room, which is hiring. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. If you can hear me loud and clear, if you use the chat button at the bottom and give me a Y, just so I know you're here and you're listening. Hi, Danielle. Great. Glad you're here. Cheryl, glad you're here. Awesome. Bobby. All right. Everybody's popping in. So wonderful. Well, glad you can hear us today. We've got about 30 minutes planned, so we know how busy everybody is, but since this is such an important topic, we wanted to spend a little time talking about hiring. So this has been really, really constant, particularly over about the last 6 to 12 months, about how difficult it is to hire. So Emily, what's the secret? Come on, tell us how are we going to get more people in the practice?
You're putting that's a lot of pressure. We really wish we were coming to you today with the secret to hiring. We know how difficult it's been out there, especially for our veterinary friends. It's always been tough to recruit, but especially, like Christy said, over the last 6 to 12 months, as we've been slowly easing out of the pandemic environment. But unfortunately, as hard as we've looked, we have not been able to find a magic hiring wand. I'm super sorry about that. I know, right? Believe me, nobody wishes more than we do that we had found one. The good news is that there are definitely some things that you can do in your practices to improve your chances of attracting and retaining great team members. And so we're going to focus on one of those things today. We have worked with so many practices who have really viewed this time as an opportunity to embrace innovation, focus on growing as leaders, and contribute to what's really shaping up to be a shift in our workforce. So Summer, over to you to introduce the one topic that we are going to be chatting about most today in our efforts to make great places to work.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emily. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about kind of a big theme that's been, really going around, which is going to be flexibility. So with all going on, like really these last couple crazy years with COVID and everything, we haven't yet returned to really what we say the normal. But what a lot of candidates and employers and things that really has been looking for is they're deciding to kind of accept the new role, which is the big thing is just flexibility, and that's what a lot of people are looking forward to. So yeah, what's kind of your thoughts on that, Emily? What do you guys think?
Well, if our listeners are like a lot of practices that we work with, we just let some wind out of their sails when we said flexibility. Don't worry, if that was you, you're not alone. A lot of the practices we work with feel that way. It's a big limiting belief that we encounter when we're working with practices to help them move the needle forward on finding great new team members. Wouldn't you agree? Do you hear that from your practices too, Christy, on your side?
Yeah, I really do. And part of that is the necessities of the practice. I mean, you need to have bodies there in the building doing the work. It's not something that can lend itself really, really easily to having a more remote workforce. But I want to challenge everybody to think broader, because we have to be really flexible in our thinking as well about how we might be able to offer some different alternatives to our workforce, which really, really needs the ability to, maybe take off early, or to be on quarantine, or to be with a sick kid. And how can we figure out some tools to make that work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a need in every industry and every vertical and every size of a company. You're absolutely right. Before we dive into the how, to add flexibility, let's first talk about why we should add flexibility other than what we already mentioned, and what flexibility is and is not. Summer, I think that you're going to ask for some hints about some things related to a survey you took.
Oh, wait, what we're gonna, at first, we're gonna ask everybody what they think the survey
that's what I
results
mean.
are.
Yes,
Okay, we're
exactly.
gonna, okay.
Yes,
So,
yes.
what do you think? Now, I want you to enter in the chat box here. What do you think the number one thing people asked for who were looking for a new job?
And flexibility is off the table.
Yeah, flexibility is off the table because this is going to be everything. Work from home's coming up. Anybody else?
Did we give them like some tips of like what the results were, like just the key things?
Okay, so if I gave you three, if I said work-life balance, salary, and company culture, what do you think the number one thing was? All right, don't be shy. There are no wrong answers.
So just go ahead and enter that in the chat bar and let's see what you
All
guys
right,
think.
we have a vote for work-life balance. You have any more votes? All right. Well, money.
Money.
I'm glad somebody brought up money, right? Yep, money is definitely up there. Any other ones? All right. Well, let's see what the actual results of the survey.
Perfect. Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll bring up those results. So this was the results of a poll that we took. So there was over 1,200 responses in there. And as you guys can see, definitely work-life balance was one of the number one results in there.
Absolutely. So the why is really the easiest part. We've already mentioned it, work-life balance, flexibility, common themes. And I'm sure there will be some folks who are surprised that work-life balance had such a lead on salary, because I know that that's commonly viewed as the most important motivator, and it's not. But most of us have seen the headlines. We've fielded requests from existing team members. And to be honest, we need that work-life balance and flexibility ourselves. The push for it, for flexibility and remote work is coming from necessity in a lot of cases, especially for those who have caregiving responsibilities in their personal lives, because our sources for support in that area have also been disrupted by the challenge in hiring and the pandemic, of course. So with work-life balance, by far being the most important factor employees are considering at the moment, it might be surprising to those of us who are with us today from our DVMelite community, because we really talk a lot about culture and leadership. And we focus on those. And so there may be some folks here who are surprised to see these results, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Work-life balance, fair pay, money, support, supportive coworkers and team members, and opportunities for growth. None of those things happen in a workplace by accident. They're the result of great leadership. And when you have a great leader who's focusing on those components, it's very likely that they're focusing on other aspects that build a great culture. And so the culture tends to come more naturally. So we weren't actually too surprised to see that from the employee perspective, they ranked the importance of culture and great management lower on the scale. So since the why is pretty easily understandable in terms of the need for flexibility and balance, let's spend some time on chatting about what flexibility is and then how we can incorporate it into our practices. Christy, tell us a little bit about what your practices have been saying about flexibility and what they think it means for team members.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because like I mentioned before, we need bodies to take care of clients, to take care of pets. I mean, that is a big part of it. And it can be really hard to think about, like, how could I possibly do any part of this job from home or remotely or offer flexible hours? And so that's been something that, we, both of our companies, have really been thinking a lot about to try to navigate through the pandemic. And I think a lot of times practices will say, like, well, I just can't allow people to just come and go as they wish, arrive late, call out, choose their schedules. All those things. Does this mean that, the work's not going to get done? And, who's going to be answering my phone? all that stuff comes up.
Absolutely. I hear the attendance and punctuality one a lot from my members. That's usually the first thing that they say. Well, I can't just let my team members come and go as they please. Absolutely not. And the second most important one is, yes, they need to be on site. Summer, what do your clients tend to say about flexibility? Do you get the same type of feedback from them, or do they have different pain points surrounding being flexible employers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the probably biggest things is like the technical side. They're afraid of setting up more of like remote work. They think it's kind of overwhelming. They just don't feel like they can envision like how to make that work.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I know that will resonate with quite a few of our members too. Unless you really love IT, it's an overwhelming aspect to consider, setting that all up and figuring it out, making sure it's secure, making sure that it works and there are no disruptions to the service that your clients are receiving when they call directly into the practice and someone there answers. So it's definitely a key factor in building flexibility into our workplaces for our practices. So going back to what Christy mentioned, and we mentioned about the attendance and punctuality thing, flexibility does not, to be clear, mean allowing people to have poor attendance. So rest assured that you do not have to accept that. In fact, it's kind of interesting, but people who have flexible work arrangements actually crave boundaries and expectations, clear expectations. So it is super important, and you absolutely do not need to, let your employees dictate the terms and conditions of how they do their work and what they do. So have you chatted about that with your folks too, Summer? I know that you are a remote worker yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually been a remote worker for over 4 years. So even pre-COVID, and I absolutely love it. It's really important just to really set those clear expectations and boundaries with like your team members and your workers. So they really know like what to expect and when to turn in your work and things like that. But even with a lot of practices that I work with, I hear this a lot. And I actually have like a really good example from one doctor I actually talked with, and they actually wanted to have a more flexible work experience. And one of the key drivers was like one thing you mentioned earlier is like, they're a caregiver, they actually had their kids and they wanted to, be able just to be more present in their kids' life and pick them up from school and things like that. And so the owner of the practice was wanting to make this accommodation for this doctor. And to be able to make that happen, they were just like, okay, yeah, you can be able to go home and, be able to pick up your kids from school. But to do that, you just have to take your medical records home with you to fill out your patient's charts at home and do like an hour of telemedicine. So I just thought that was a really great story to be able to help make that accommodation and be flexible with their, working and what they needed to be more present in their kids' lives. So we definitely can make more flexible work environment happen with a lot more accommodations like that. So I thought that was great.
That is a really great example. I love it. And so we've established that flexibility is not poor attendance. What flexibility are things like Summer just mentioned, non-traditional schedules, maybe a split schedule. I mean, we're talking about maybe an hour and a half a day that this doctor is able to work from home and be present for their children and still work on site at the practice. So that's a perfect example, Summer. Absolutely. So remote work is coming up, and I think the flexibility piece folks can figure that out based on what we've said so far. But let's talk a little bit more about how of the remote piece, especially for technicians or veterinary nurses and doctors, because I know that those are two really difficult positions to fill historically, and even more so in the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the shortage that there is of both DVMs and of vet techs is huge. There's so much competition for these particular folks. But what we're seeing is that our practices are having really good luck with either full or part-time remote positions for experienced technicians. This is a high burnout field, and there are a lot of techs who just for whatever reason can't continue to be within a practice, but still want to keep their skills sharp, but they aren't able to work in a traditional tech role. And so can we find a place to put these experienced folks to work for us?
Yeah, that's where we probably run into, honestly, the biggest limiting belief with technicians and doctors, that there just isn't enough that they can do remotely to make it worthwhile to consider and set up the technology and do all of those things. But if you sit down and think about it, there are quite a few things that can be done at home or remotely and don't have to be done on site, aren't there? Summer,
Yeah.
you have experience there.
Yeah, absolutely. So for sure, actually, as a former vet tech myself, there's definitely ways we can do this remotely for both, vet techs and DVM. So, just kind of talking right now as a former vet tech, telemedicine is a huge, proponent right now that we can use this. So things as a former vet tech, we can do triaging, taking, patient histories for veterinarians, medication refills, answering, those medication questions, lab results, scheduling appointments, those are just some things that come to the top of my mind right now. But there's definitely much more out there. And telemedicine is a huge thing. And these can be done through, Vet Store. We have a telemedicine features where, the techs can chat with them, have those phone calls and provide all those clients updates. So that's one thing we can do. So that's a great option.
Yeah, and not only with doctors and nurses and techs, there are some responsibilities that fall on your front desk that could easily become part of a remote role for some kind of nurse or technician. For example, like reactivation calls, recalls after surgery. Usually the front desk does the reminder calls, and perhaps, or if there's people who have just particular medical questions, that could be done by a remote person. If it's done on the phone now, there's really not a lot of reason you can't also do that remotely. So it is something to consider.
Yeah, phone calls is really one of the biggest issues I'm hearing, other than staffing shortages. So I really hear this, every day from practices that they're overwhelmed with phone calls. And, with Vet Story, our practices love to really use our real-time online booking. So this, it goes straight in from their website, clients can book, and it goes straight onto their calendar, and we help integrate with their practice management software. So that's another great way to use and reduce phone calls by 60%. We also help save on average about 25 hours per month on staff phone time. So that's a great feature. I know you guys also have your concierge service as well. So that's another great feature as well to use.
Absolutely. Those phones definitely have been a big pain point, especially with curbside and the need to call, lots of phones ringing and stressed out front desk folks. Those options that we've talked about so far would definitely reduce the number of calls coming into the front desk team. And you're right, our practices who use concierge have that added layer of a front desk relief by taking calls for practices to help, like Christy said, with anything a person on site could help with on the phone, really. And it's super customized too, so they can do anything you want them to do and not do things you don't want them to do. So it's kind of a multi-layered approach. You can do it yourself, or you can do some of it yourself and ask other experts to do some of it for you as well.
Yeah, that's what's really nice about the concierge program, is that it can be there for you really as your backup front desk. So I just saw a message today from someone who had to have 2 staff members out at the last minute, and she had written a note and said, "Thank goodness for concierge," because as a small practice, you don't have anybody on your phones. It's a huge problem for your day-to-day operations. And the interesting thing about it as well is this can also help with your flexibility, because if you can perhaps use the concierge team to cover your 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. or your after hours, your 5 to 6 p.m., that can give your staff a little more flexibility to perhaps, if it's a school program that they need to get out to, or if it's a sick kid, that you have that backup in place. And we're seeing that is a huge value for concierge, and less stress for the whole team, because you've got a backup and they don't feel so bad. You almost feel terrible if you're like, I can't leave my team behind, right? When you're working in a practice. But if you've got a way to have some backup, that can be really helpful for your team and contribute to that work-life balance.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, Christy, to have that backup. And if you need the time away, to not feel like you're putting, transferring your work onto your team members and you feel poorly about that. But on the flip side of that, the team members who are there, it helps to reduce the likelihood that they will become resentful. If somebody, if they're constantly having to close that gap for folks who are out. So that's an excellent point. And I love the idea of the possibility of remote techs doing reactivation calls. It sounds like there would be a lot of opportunity for them to contribute to the success of the practice. They would be able to, for example, explain why it's important for a client to schedule that annual exam for their cat. They would be able to chat through them about the benefits and the necessity of having that senior panel done for pets when they get into those years, and even plant seeds for services that you might be focusing on, like dentals, for example, during dental months. They would be super knowledgeable and better able to plant those seeds when they're making those reactivation calls. Summer, any other insights from a tech perspective, since you have come from that arena?
Yeah, I mean, kind of as I mentioned earlier, there are just a lot of ways that techs can take off work from the doctor's plates for sure. It's just a lot of great ways to be really efficient and have them do like that pre and post work through like the telemedicine and things like that. So remote work and that flexibility is a great way for that for sure.
Awesome. So Summer, do you have any examples for us related to the how of the whole telemedicine side from practices that you've worked with who have really knocked it out of the park with implementing telemed and are so glad they did? It'd be really cool if you had one who was maybe skeptical at first and then had a lot of success with it.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I've worked with like tons of practices who definitely implement telemedicine. So it's a really great flexibility. So a lot of practices, thought, COVID or thought telemedicine was going to be just kind of a tool here for COVID and kind of like curbside. That's kind of what a lot of people thought. But it's really here, I think, to stay really. I think it's just a great way for practices to be efficient, capture more revenue, and really be kind of that flexibility, especially for the work-life balances as we're kind of talking. So I guess like for a practice to say if they're like hesitant at first, really when you can see with Vet Story or booking those appointments online and then it goes into the telemedicine, we can actually capture the payments up front. And so, when practices see, really how we can be, capture all their hospital protocols, I think that's really where we capture, the hesitancy of like online booking. A lot of practices are like, well, they're afraid of online booking and the telemedicine and they get a little hesitant there, but we capture all the protocols and can get very customized with it. And the telemedicine, they can really do anywhere. We have like a really good chat feature where they can get that and process the payments up front. So it's just a really great way. And then what I really love about it is, we really can do wellness, post-op, new puppy, kitten. And then really the great thing is we had a really good quote and a really good case study that I love to share with practices that are really considering telemedicine. And we have a quote from one of our doctors that it says, really charge for your knowledge and advice. That's one thing that a lot of doctors like just really give out. But make sure you are charging for that. When you get that call at 8 p.m. for, a dog throwing up and vomiting, but that could probably really wait till the next day, but you're still taking that phone call anyways, make sure you are charging for that because, most veterinarians go to school for 10 plus years and you're hundreds of $1,000s in debt, do charge for that visit because that is a visit that you need to get and capture that revenue for. So just make sure, you are utilizing your time because you do spend so much, go to school and get your time for it. So that's my advice.
Absolutely, for sure. And that's a concept that resonates with us. And I love what you mentioned about building it out to capture their protocol just for the purposes of implementing the technology. But that really perked my HR and people ops ears because a lot of the practices we work with are smaller and they do not have those things documented presently. So as part of the setup, it may seem overwhelming, but it's an excellent opportunity to begin to document those procedures, which is super important when we're in a season where there's a lot of turnover in practices. You're training new team members. The practice owner or practice managers may have a need to be off, just like everybody else, because they're human too. And having them documented is a hidden bonus to moving forward with something like you're mentioning, because it's definitely a good thing to have for sure. And I'm liking the telemedicine. I know personally, I have a cat who is almost 20 years old, and he is not a fan of car rides, the vet, anything that does not involve sitting on a lap or eating treats. So he would definitely be a fan of telemed. So there is the benefit to those pets who don't do well in the car to be able to reduce the trips that they need to take. Christy, would Skittles agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
she did not make an appearance. She usually comes to our webinars. I'm a little disappointed in her. She's curled up by the fire. So I guess that's a good place too. Summer, so I think that's really great to start thinking about those ideas. And what resonated with me is how important it is for practice owners and our tech resources to leverage their knowledge and to make sure that they're getting paid for their time. And that I think is really one of the keys to the hiring shortage. Is it is requiring practices to be more mindful, more creative, and more systematic with how they do business, because you don't have a half an hour to spend on the phone with somebody talking about your pet's skin issues that you're not getting paid for. That is just not a way that is sustainable for your business. So use some of these technology tools like the phones, like the remote front desk, like the telemedicine, to continue to allow your business to really work efficiently and prosper. And the good news is like we're here for you. We have the tools to help you, and we'd love to talk with you about it.
Absolutely. But even if there are still definitely ways to build these components into your workforce on your own and take bits and pieces that you feel will benefit you.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So I know there's one question, Summer, that we get a lot when we talk about telemedicine, that there's different state regulations that govern telemedicine. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we just recommend kind of checking with your local state veterinary license board, because it kind of varies from state to state. So, but the good news is, we haven't really had any issues supporting our practices with telemedicine. So that's really the great thing there. So yeah, I just recommend kind of checking with your local state.
That's awesome to hear. Christy's right. That's definitely a concern that we hear when the topic of telemed comes up, but it sounds like you've not had any practices that have not been able to implement because they've run into something that wouldn't allow it in their area?
Yeah, no issues so far. So it's
awesome.
Been fabulous.
Yeah. I know lots of practices will be glad to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we're actually coming up at the end of our half an hour. This is just whipped right by you two. Thank you so much for joining me and chatting about this. This is really fun. I'm sure we're going to have some questions from folks on the line about something that perhaps got their interest. So we will be in touch with an email after. In the chat box, type in what was of interest. We have HR Dream Team Services from DVMelite. We have Remote Front Desk from DVMelite. We have Concierge from DVMelite, and also our Ultimate Practice Growth Program. So that's all the stuff that we work on. And then from the Vetstoria side, we have live online booking and telemedicine. Anything I'm missing, Summer?
Yeah, and then we also have payments as well.
Oh, wait, wonderful.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
That'd be great. So if any of those are areas that you're super interested in, we can you can pop those into the chat box and we'll get in touch with you on those. And I can imagine that if you found this webinar useful, we'll probably be able to have more of these and talk about all of these things in a little more depth at some point. Sound good, you two?
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Christy and Summer.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we will hopefully talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.